Hey y'all, it's Will. Welcome to the Backpack Composer. So I am finally figuring out this YouTube vlog thing. And a thing that I have kept seeing is to listen to viewer feedback. And I've been pretty good about answering everything, but there was one thing that kept coming up that I could not figure out how to fix in a way that wouldn't mess up my algorithm. And so today I decided what I was going to do was just re-upload the video that everyone says they can't hear me speaking in without any of the background music. Now, before I do this, to provide the logic for how we ended up where we are, if one is doing a vlog on how the iPad can still produce professional grade recordings, I thought it would be good to play a professional recording in the background as I was talking about, hey, here's what it does. And then, since I had just finished talking about mixing and mastering, I thought, again, we see where it is I keep making the mistake. I need to think less. I thought it would be a good idea to level dialogue in the same way you would music, and I was very wrong. Had I sung all of the things I said to the music, the mix would have been perfect. But instead, with no reference for dynamics and or flow, I just spoke with these fully orchestrated pieces behind me. And it looks like half my audience could hear me, or they read the subtitles, and half my audience couldn't. And so I present for you my argument as to why the iPad is better than the MacBook, sans background music. Hello, welcome back to the Backpack Composer. I am your composer for the evening, Will. I am a professional musician in that I get paid to be a musician, but it is not my profession. The premise of this channel is that my dream was to be a full-time musician, and so since I could not make a sustainable living as a musician, as most don't, because none of us will disagree that there is an element of luck to this statistically, I wanted to be a producer who does not necessarily need to be confined to a production space. If we look at the recording environment at present, to get to the $1 million studio, you need to be in a big city. I have worked in the $1 million studios before. I do have song credits to my name, so the principles I have been talking about in my vlog were not learned via trial and error. I did an extensive apprenticeship, and the lessons I learned, I moved over to the iPad. After I made an extended stop on PC, let's talk about that for a second, because that's actually what today's video is about. The MacBook can do all with no issues. But if you think about the premise that you get what you pay for, a MacBook costs a ton of money. That's not to say it's not worth it, but most quote-unquote starving artists / professional musicians can afford one MacBook at a time, and then Apple does the upgrade program. So then the question becomes, well, what if I can't get that initial MacBook? Here is where Windows and tablets come in. So I started my journey in an analog studio, like between 30 and 48 analog channels that recorded to an old school external hard drive that was part of the actual console, but the faders were controlled via MIDI on a Windows machine. I liked this setup, so I built one of my own as a teenager. Obviously, it was not the $1 million setup, but it did the same thing. That took up an entire bedroom. So having people over to record, there was lots of tripping over each other. Things got really hot, really fast, and uncomfortable. Since I was living with my parents, those 3 a.m. recording sessions very quickly became a problem. Enter the Windows Surface. I had the idea, what if I could find the best processor in the most portable unit that was not an expensive Apple machine? And so we upgraded our equipment. We were still multi-track recording with MIDI faders, but we got a Windows Surface. And as far as recording goes, it got the job done for decades. Whenever something went wrong, they're affordable enough I could just replace it. It was here that I started to notice that my recording sessions were getting longer in length. And it wasn't necessarily because the songs were getting longer. It was because the processing was getting harder and the space in between takes was getting longer. If I could give you a recent example, I did an album maybe a year and a half ago on my Windows Surface Pro. It recorded the whole thing one instrument at a time just fine. When it came time to mix everything down, I sat in front of a desk for 3 days straight, rendering down one song at a time. And a 3-minute long song took 45 minutes to render, and then I would have to listen to it, make a slight change, and then render it again. And 45-minute chunks of time add up pretty quickly. Processing at 100% overclocked for 3 days straight. When the project was done, the Surface never turned on again. I needed a new one. By then, working a day job, I had a little bit of money. I had a little bit of credit. I didn't want to buy anything on credit, but I knew I didn't want to go out and just try something cash and have it not work. I definitely knew I didn't want a MacBook because I got so used to the tablet form. And serendipitously, I saw an article saying that Logic Pro for iPad was getting an update. This is significant for me because, one, I didn't know there was a Logic Pro for iPad. I was always told that Logic is for MacBooks and Logic is expensive, but Logic Pro is a subscription in itself. And I could get the iPad through my cell provider, and my monthly bill only went up $25. So when you math it, $25 in addition to a bill I was already paying, plus $4 for a software that does the same as others that I had paid $200 or $300 for. Fiscally, it made the most sense to upgrade at a monthly cost, so there was no real hoops to jump through. So we have established how the iPad came to be. So now we need to talk about what differentiates Logic on iPad, or just the iPad in general, to the MacBook. The short answer is the need for a desk. So depending on who you ask, Logic for MacBook and Logic for iPad don't do the same thing, and that is half true. Since doing this vlog, I have joined several chat groups to kind of stay up to date on changes and coming features, and I've seen a lot of people asking, should I do Logic Pro for iPad because I have an iPad, or should I replace my MacBook? And most of the responses I saw were no, the MacBook is better. I disagree. And the reason I disagree is, while Logic for MacBook can do more in the MacBook environment, it is very rare that one person would need every single feature. And this is where the iPad actually excels. In Logic for MacBook, you have to download individual plugins, most of which have a cost associated with them. And yeah, after you download them, they're yours forever. But when you think about it, it's not Logic doing the work anymore. Now it's the plugin. Similarly, on the iPad, you can download plugins from the App Store, and within Logic, the plugins are doing the work. Logic is just the house that kind of holds them all. So in that regard, it is doing the same thing as the MacBook. You can plug the same peripherals in, you can do the same MIDI commands, you can work the same workflow. It's just more form-fitting, but it is more portable. That was a very long-winded introduction into what it is I'm going to talk to you today about. Okay, so having established all of that, we have to kind of put it into context. In a professional studio, all of your instruments are going piece by piece into a console that is recording anywhere between 6 and 128 channels at a time to an onboard hard drive. Fast forward through the evolution of the home studio, and MacBook users with a designated recording space can multi-track record using a multi-track interface and a patch bay to record multiple tracks at a time that way. And this is useful if you're recording a full band. So my setup kind of takes all of that and says how much of this can be done externally so that the iPad can focus on just the mixing and the arranging. And so what I have done is every instrument goes to an amplifier. But then within the signal flow from the instrument to the amplifier, I stuck the Allen Heath in the middle. And so it interrupts everything, but then the signal still continues where it's going. And then from the Allen Heath, I go to the iPad, and the iPad itself acts as the hard drive. Coming out of the M4 chip is a USB-C cable that goes to a powered hub. The powered hub is the important part because the peripherals will not work with just the iPad's power. And I can tell you from experience, if you attempt to run the peripherals without an adequate power source, your iPad battery will die so fast. So if I'm just sitting and practicing, I can turn on my regular mixer, keep my iPad unplugged, and just do what I do. If I want to record, all I have to do is plug the iPad in and hit record. There is no setup because I would have already set up a template. So the iPad actually works into my regular practice workflow as a solo musician. In terms of mixing and mastering, you are normally mixing and mastering as a solo engineer, so it doesn't change that much. If only one person is using the device, meaning the device is only doing a small number of things at a time, then the expensive MacBook is overkill. So the way my signal flow works, in my first video, I showed my travel audio interface and my at-home audio interface. This works for both of them. I will go instrument to mixer. So for my bass, my guitars, my grand piano, each of them goes into the CQ12T and then back out to its amplifier. So as I'm recording just the clean signal pre-EQ, and then in post, I can add whatever effects I like, which essentially makes it so if I don't like the way it sounds tonally while I'm recording it, I can tweak it on the back end, versus swapping the order and going instrument, amp, mixer, and then recording from the mixer to the iPad and having that sound by itself, and all I can do is clean it, not change it. Those will go direct into the Allen Heath and then out to the amp, which has its own EQ on it. So as I'm just playing, like for practice, it sounds like I want it to, but as I'm recording, I am recording a completely dry signal. So my guitar, each of those will go direct into the Allen Heath, will come back out to a Fender Tone Master 4x10 Bassman, and then we'll go out to a Fender Tone Master multi-effects pedal. I don't use all of those at the same time. The idea here is as I record the dry signal, I can play around with the switches and knobs until I get it to sound the way I want to, or I can just pull up Tone Stack within Logic and do it that way. What I will often do is build my preset at band practice on the Tone Master, and then I will come home, open up Tone Stack, and recreate the preset there. So it's the same thing, just within Logic. The same logic that everyone says does not do the same thing as the MacBook. But obviously it does, because I got it to do it. And then I'm coming from the iPad into a powered hub. Into the hub is my MPC Key37, which has thousands of sounds on it, thereby minimizing the need for most of the plugins I would want to download on a MacBook. Going into the MPC is a second Akai MIDI keyboard expansion, so I can do all of my MIDI programming outside of the iPad and then just send it in as an audio signal, or I can send a MIDI signal from the iPad to the MPC and then send it back as an audio signal as a separate loop that is still independent of the initial setup. Those of you who know how signal flow works will immediately be saying, wouldn't the MIDI signal feed back? The answer is yes. And so what we do is while we are recording our MIDI, everything else is muted, and then we mute the MIDI when we do playback, and it plays back as if I recorded from that instrument in the first place. So I can write my MIDI track in Logic or GarageBand, play it or send the MIDI signal to the MPC, but then record the MPC's audio as if I were playing it myself, or I can just play it myself. This is how I do my strings, and how I do my horns, and how I do my atmospheric sounds. All of that is outward gear on the Akai MPC 37 because, like we said in the first video, we got all of the plugins. Now, I mentioned that the audio signal is leaving the Akai. It is not going directly into the iPad. It makes a stop first. When I take my synth and my iPad out to record, I can put the iPad on a mic stand, can't do that with a MacBook, and I can run 2 channels into the Akai and record 4 channels that way, 2 from the Akai and 2 from the external instruments. Or with my portable setup, the full setup, what I'll do is bring the CQ12T, so I have 12 channels to choose from, and then I can go crazy. So when I bring that to band practice to record, I can do 5 drum mics, stereo singer, stereo bass, stereo guitar, come home and clean that up from my couch. So now when we take all of this and we kind of distill it down into the bedroom producer, as they call it, or the iPad user in our case, I have eliminated the need for most of the expensive plugins from the onset. If you are a solo musician, songwriter, composer, arranger, whatever, as long as your files are on the iPad can handle whatever kind of effects processing you throw at it. Or if you are a musician, singular, recording individual tracks to be played back all at once, the playback is easier on the iPad than the recording. So you can do your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 individual takes, cut them up the way you like them, and then play them back and add whatever you want to it in terms of plugins or effects that are baked in. And it's the same as what you could have done on the MacBook, but at a fraction of the cost, because most apps cost less than software. And the iPad itself, we established a used one will still work, thus it costs significantly less than a MacBook. Point being, these things matter because if the premise to this channel is that we want a full studio that fits in a backpack, you're not carrying that much to begin with, which means the iPad makes more sense than the MacBook. The premise here, and the point I'm trying to make to all of this, is in my first video, I verified that Logic Pro will work in any iPad made since 2021, I believe it was, which says you don't need the newest one. You can go out right now and buy a used iPad as long as it has the right chipset, and I will repost the graphic from my first video, and all of this will work. The plugins will work, the MIDI sequencing will work, a routing setup similar to mine will work, and a used iPad costs considerably less than a used MacBook and takes up less space. And I can tell you for a fact is much easier to use with a stylus than a mouse. It's also worth noting that the amount of storage on your iPad will affect the price. My iPad is currently plugged into a 10 terabyte hard drive. So after my files are done, they leave the iPad and sit in the cloud and on the hard drive. So as soon as my mixdown is done, remove the download on the iPad. It still exists, it's still in the project, but the project itself is in the cloud instead of on the iPad. The iPad can definitely compete with the MacBook. That concludes today's video. With that, may your gear be light, your latency low, and your dogs quiet while you track vocals.